Okay, the sitting is resumed and it is questions to the Minister of Justice. And we call Michelle McElveen. Minister.
In England and Wales and Northern Ireland, the rebuttable presumption of dole and capax was abolished in 1998 as part of an overhaul of wider youth justice legislation. No consideration has been given to its reintroduction as part of my department's work to review and increase minimum age of criminal responsibility. Dole and capax enabled the prosecution of some younger children if it could be proven that they had the cognitive maturity to understand that their actions represented serious wrongdoing. In the intervening years since its abolition, advances in neuroscience have shown that children's brains are still maturing well into adolescence and that they lack the cognitive, emotional and moral capacity to be held criminally responsible in the same way as adults. This is a scientific fact and we should not force children to have to prove it to the courts. Our understanding of the impact of trauma, adverse childhood incidents and societal factors on children has also increased in recent years, and we know that many of these factors can lead a child into offending behaviour. This has resulted in the adoption of a child-first approach to youth offending, and consequently the number of children facing prosecution has greatly reduced. Indeed, it is extremely rare for a child under the age of 14 to be sentenced to custody in Northern Ireland. Reintroducing dole and capax would also have a significant operational impact on justice partners, in particular police and PPS, who would be faced with a situation whereby they would have to process every child accused and arrested up to the point of an assessment and decision being made. This could be nugatory work in many cases at a time when resources are stretched. I therefore do not believe that returning to dole and capax is in line with the best interests of children, victims or communities. Instead, we should be focusing on working with children to help them understand the impact and consequences of their behaviour, encourage them to take responsibility for their actions and support them to make changes and avoid future offending. This is the most effective way to ensure our communities are safer and the number of victims reduced.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it is disappointing to hear. How does the Minister intend to address the concerns of professionals over the heightened risk of exploitation of children by criminals should her party colleagues' amendment on raising the age of criminal responsibility be passed?
The rules are already in place, Mr. Speaker, in terms of the defence of coercion, and those would apply in situations where younger children are already coerced into criminal activity, and it would be dealt with under child criminal exploitation. The offence is being committed by the older person, not by the child. And I think the point that is raised about the danger of this is that if you don't raise the age of criminal responsibility, still young children are being groomed into criminal gangs. But instead of the police being able to treat them as victims in those circumstances, they have to first process them as potential criminals themselves. And that has led to criticism that too few children are being referred to the National Referral Mechanism as a result of coercive activity that has led them to offend in the first place.
Emma Sheeran.
King Corleanne, firstly, can I thank the Minister for her pronunciation of that? I was going to call it dole and capax, so I really appreciate you clarifying that. Would the Minister agree with me that we have seen across the world that model was costly and inefficient, and that best practice across the world tells us that raising the age of criminal responsibility leads to better outcomes for our young people across society?
Well, I thank the member. It's a long time since I studied Latin at school, and I doubt my pronunciation is perfect, so it could be either of us is right on that one. It is the case that we have moved on in terms of our understanding of how children's brains develop and the influences that can be brought to bear on those. We have already a very successful youth justice system which aims to deflect young children away from the criminal justice system at every stage and to support them and their families to tackle offending and dangerous behaviours. And it is important to look at what other jurisdictions do in this space, and those that tend to have better outcomes for their young people and also safer communities also tend to be those who don't criminalise young people at a young age, but instead put in place the supports to protect them from potential criminal exploitation, but also to deal with potential offending behaviours at the earliest point so that young people don't go on to commit more serious offences.
Shamahal.
And thank you, Minister, for your answer so far. And now I'm not going to try and pronounce it because Emma has confused me in my head of which way I was going to say it. Would you agree that reintroducing that framework would be a backward step, because you end up with 10 to 13-year-olds who are still open to arrest, prosecution, rather than being diverted from the justice system altogether.
Well, actually, were it to be reintroduced, you could end up with children of any age being referred into the formal justice system and being considered potentially capable of understanding the crime that they'd committed. So you would be, will you either accept that there is a minimum age of criminal responsibility, or you apply this in a different way. So you would run that risk. The further concern that I would have, though, is that you would end up expending significant resources in terms of determining whether a child has the understanding and the capability to be able to be held criminally accountable, when we already know from all of the different studies that have been made of children's development that even where a child knows they've done wrong, their ability to conceive of permanence, for example, can be very challenging even into their teens. And we also, of course, know that we have restricted resources, and to spend huge amounts of time looking at every child who is referred into the system to make this decision is money that I believe would be better spent supporting those young people, diverting them away from criminal activity, supporting their families and peers so that they are no longer as vulnerable to criminal activity, and hopefully also investing in support for victims, because that is, I think, our main concern, is that we do what is right by society as a whole, and by removing young people from the justice system, we have been able to demonstrate significant improvements in people's outcomes.
Sean Burrows.
Speaker, the Minister for Justice mentioned victims. Can she just confirm, and I would appreciate it in a yes or no, if a 13-and-a-half-year-old boy upskirted, down-bloused, or inflicted grievous bodily harm on a female teacher, would that 13-and-a-half-year-old boy be able to be subject to criminal investigation and prosecution if the victim wished it, if Ms Mulholland's amendment goes through? Yes or no?
Well, with respect, Mr Speaker, the member has a right to put his question, but I have the right to answer in whatever form I choose, and I will choose to answer in my own words and not those provided to me. As we stand here now, if someone under the age of the minimum age of criminal responsibility commits a serious offence, we do not simply allow that person to go free. There are issues of public protection that have to be considered. There are issues that have to be considered around that child and what risks they have placed themselves in. And there are risks also to other potential victims. So this is not about creating a structure which would allow those who commit serious offences to get off scot-free and not be held accountable. It is about creating an accountability framework that is not part of the formal criminal justice system, but which allows young people to be confronted with the seriousness of their actions, for the support and education necessary to be provided to them so that we can desist, so that they can desist from their offending behaviours. And I believe that therefore in those cases there would be appropriate measures taken. And it has to be said, Mr Speaker, it's often said that hard cases make bad law. So I don't think that our focus in debating what the minimum age of criminal responsibility should be is to go searching out hypothetical hard cases. It should be to look at the evidence base that we have in terms of development, child development, brain development, and how we can support our young people better so that they don't offend, that they become well-adjusted and positive and constructive citizens in our community, which is what I think we would all like to see.
For our answer so far. Can I just ask the Minister, what are the mechanisms and how long is it going to take the youth justice system, the PPS, PSNI, Youth Justice Agency, to prepare or to be ready for what could be a significant rise in the minimum age of criminal responsibility?
Well, we have already been clear that we would have to bring forward the right structures. Those will have to be scrutinised and those will have to be stress tested. So this will be the start of a journey, not the end point. And we would not obviously be enabling this legislation immediately, because we would want to spend time with our justice partners looking at the kind of mechanisms that need to be in place. To be clear, the Youth Justice Agency already deals with many young people who fall into this category who commit offences, who exhibit behaviours that fall short of a criminal offence, in order to deflect them away from a criminal setting and in order to try to deal with their behaviours. So this is not an unknown thing that the Youth Justice Agency have no experience of, but I can reassure the member for Upper Bann that we would not want to make rapid change in a space where we do not have the proper belt and braces response in place. We want to be sure that young people are protected. Often their behaviour is not just a safeguarding issue for them, but also a danger to others. And we need to make sure that there are proper checks and balances in place so that young people are held to account for their conduct, but that it's in an age-appropriate manner.
John Blair.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Question number 3.
Minister.
On the 1st of June 2023, the total prison population in Northern Ireland was 1,858. By June this year, the population had increased by over 12% to 2,086. It is to the credit of the Northern Ireland Prison Service and its staff that prison establishments have maintained stability and continued to perform effectively despite this pressure. In many cases, justice responses to individual needs and risks may be offering the right answers, but at the wrong time. Much more could be achieved if there was a collective focus on prevention in the community, rather than the justice system stepping in when earlier opportunities have been missed or when provision was inadequate. That would also mean fewer people in prison and would allow the prison service to use the resources it has available to it effectively. I will continue my work to secure a fair budget settlement for justice, including the funding required to deliver a safe, effective and efficient prison service with rehabilitation at its core. I will also continue to be clear about the consequences if that cannot be achieved.
Mr. Blair.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for that answer. Could I ask, in relation to that, what the impact has been of ongoing budget uncertainty in relation to our prisons?
Budgetary pressure on the prison service, like other parts of the justice system, can mean very difficult choices and poorer outcomes for those within the prison system. If we're to safely manage significant and sustained population increases, prison service have to have enough officers with the right training and support to be able to do their jobs. It also needs to have an estate that is modern, fit for purpose, can accommodate the population safely and reduce levels of crowding. Prisoners need to be able to access services and support delivered by a range of partners that can address their needs and risks. Prison service needs that funding so it can commission the services required to match the level of need. Many of those services are also provided by third sector partners in the community and voluntary sector, and so the uncertainty that faces their budgets is also a challenge to us delivering within justice. Ultimately, poor experience in custody will lead to poorer outcomes upon release and a greater likelihood of reoffending, perpetuating the damaging cycle that we have and resulting in more victims of crime. Without proper funding, prison service cannot do its core purpose, making the community safer by supporting and challenging people to change.
Ciara Ferguson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank the Minister thus far. Minister, we know our prison population has increased by 50% over the last 5 years, and I do welcome that you say that within the justice system, prevention in the community and rehabilitation should be at its core. So on that, could you update us on what discussions you may have had with our Communities Minister and our Health Minister around the impacts of community health and insecurities around housing on both the reliance of short-term custody and recidivism rates, please? Thank you.
We have had a number of conversations over many years, and they are part of the wider programme through the Executive to try to reduce offending and reoffending, and they sit as part of the programme board around driving that forward. We recognise that having a stable accommodation, having legitimate employment and having mental health and addiction services available are three key things that will help people to be able to reintegrate into the community and build a successful and positive life. Having family support is another pillar that can also make a huge difference, and we obviously do all that we can to allow people to maintain that. I do believe that there is a role for all departments in this. We need to look at where we can find better jobs for people, and so the department has launched recently an organisation called The Bridge. It is business-led and it is to support employers who want to employ those who have a criminal record in order that they can feel confident in terms of taking forward those employment opportunities, because if we are to see prisoners come out of prison and not reoffend, it is important that they have productive activity during the day, that they have the access to mental health and addiction services, because many of them will trace their offending back to addiction, and also that they have stable accommodation. And we are, of course, looking particularly at some of the bail pilot work that we're doing for people who are currently on remand. We're going to pilot that first with women in the prison system, and that again will require cooperation between all of those departments.
None.
Mr. Time and time again you say that our prisons do not have a culture problem, but time and time again ordinary hard-working prison officers are telling me that there is a fundamental problem within our prisons, with some prison wings out of control. Minister, have you lost control of Northern Ireland's prisons? And what are you going to do to address the fundamental issue around confidence in our prison service, both for the general public and also, importantly, for our prison officers who are often putting their own welfare on the line?
Well, first of all, I recognise the incredibly difficult job that prison officers do, and I'm never shy about saying that I think they place themselves in a very difficult role. It's a very challenging role where they deal with people who are both vulnerable and volatile, often in equal measure. It is undoubtedly the case that the more people we have within the prison, the more crowding that there is, the more likelihood there is of people behaving in a way that is disruptive or even dangerous to themselves and to others. However, for the member to suggest that prisons are out of control or that wings are out of control is simply not the case. I would ask him to go back and read the recent Sagini reports on Hyde Bank Wood Women's Prison, on Hyde Bank Wood Young Offenders Centre, Hyde Bank Wood College, and on McGilligan Prison. And whilst obviously there were recommendations there that suggested where improvements can be made, and we take those seriously and we will implement them, to suggest that those are prisons out of control is fundamentally denying reality that we have two of the best prisons in the UK here in Northern Ireland.
Justin McNulty.
Agus Corla, thank the Minister for her answers thus far. Given the recent rapid, unprecedented growth in the prison population and the likelihood of further increases, what plans does the Minister have in place to address this additional pressure on the prison service, either by reducing the prison population or by securing additional resources?
Well, there are a number of things that we're looking to do. I've mentioned already the bail support pilot, which we hope to roll out, which will allow us to trial alternative methods of supporting people while on bail, so outside the prison system. And we're starting that with women as the first instance, but if successful, we will then try to roll that out across the male estate. And that is important in terms of giving judges, PSNI and prosecutors the confidence that bail is a legitimate alternative to remand, because I think too often people are placed on remand as a way of managing risk, but that risk is being managed in a way that could be managed within the community just as effectively. And that's what we want to be able to create, that confidence that people are allowing people, because more people in Northern Ireland are on remand at this point in time than in any other jurisdiction in these islands, and we have a continuous high level of remand population. So that's one thing we're doing. The other thing that we have done is we have asked for additional resources so that we can provide modular accommodation, which would allow us to upscale the number of beds we have available within the prison system, not on a temporary basis but on a permanent basis, so that we're able to accommodate increasing numbers in an appropriate manner that doesn't cause the crowding that can then lead to a more volatile environment for prison officers to work. I have also and have given the prison service the authority to be able to recruit new prison officers, and those prison officers continue to be recruited as we speak. So there are a lot of things that we can do. In terms of the issue of early release, I would be very reluctant to interfere with the length of sentence that has been given by a judge, other than what are in exceptional circumstances. And if this is a growing problem with which we're going to have to wrestle, as other places have, then I don't see it any longer as exceptional, but rather a matter of routine that we need to manage within the estate we have.
Andrew McMurray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Question number 4, please.
The Criminal Justice Sentencing etc. Bill was introduced to the Assembly on Tuesday the 3rd of March. Second stage took place on Monday the 16th of March. Committee stage began on the 18th of March with the bill being referred to the Committee for Justice for scrutiny. The committee launched a call for evidence on the 31st of March, which concluded on the 22nd of May. The key purpose of the bill is to improve the effectiveness and transparency of sentencing, and so to enhance confidence in sentencing decisions and the criminal justice system more widely. The bill includes clauses to implement many of the recommendations arising from the last sentencing policy review, as well as the introduction of Charlotte's Law and a statutory aggravator model for hate crime. Sentencing is one area of public policy that is constantly evolving, and therefore I launched a review of further sentencing policy issues on the 14th of January 2026 to identify any legislative proposals that may be taken forward in the next mandate.
Mr McMurray.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Thank you, Minister. Minister, as you reference, is in an area of work that is constantly evolving. Can the Minister provide an update about criminalising the creation or sharing of non-consensual, sexually explicit deep fake images?
Minister.
Well, as members will be aware, I had hoped to be able to do this at consideration stage of the Justice Bill for new offences to criminalise the creation or sharing of non-consensual, sexually explicit deepfake images. We were unable, unfortunately, to do it via an LCM, which would have brought us into line with England and Wales, but also that would have left us with a gap given the structure of our own laws. So I think it's better that we do this locally and have the opportunity to scrutinise it here in the Assembly. As we have moved on into the drafting phase, however, it's become apparent that this is an exceptionally complex issue where more time is needed to ensure a proportionate, robust and comprehensive response to addressing all aspects of this behaviour. Therefore, in the interest of ensuring the effective progression of the Justice Bill, I have decided to look at alternative options in the form of other legislative vehicles in this mandate, which will be available to me in bringing forward these proposals within the current mandate. This includes the potential to use the Criminal Justice Sentencing Bill or indeed the Victims and Witnesses Bill.
Ollie McGrath.
Question number 5, please.
Sir.
There is a clear need to reform and modernise the justice system. I, along with Justice Partners, have prioritised the Speeding Up Justice programme of work delivered across 5 key projects. First project is out-of-court disposals, where plans are in place to bring forward secondary legislation to let police deal with more low-level offences using penalty notices. This will divert suitable cases from the courts and free up resources for more serious crime. With regard to the second project, committal reform, work is progressing with direct committal, which I intend to implement later this year. This will help the most serious cases reach the Crown Court more quickly. Thirdly, early engagement is exploring earlier engagement between police, prosecution and defence to move cases through the system more quickly. The focus is on better file quality, timeliness and reviewing better case management procedures. These projects are still in pilot phase but are showing early signs of improvement. The fourth project, remit of the Magistrates Court, is considering options to expand Magistrates Court jurisdiction. And finally, digital, which supports all of the Speeding Up Justice projects, implementing digital initiatives to help embed reform and support long-term sustainability. Taken together, these reforms are intended to reduce avoidable delay, to improve the use of criminal justice resources and ensure that court capacity is focused on the most serious cases. The pace of delivery will, however, remain closely linked to the resources available to support implementation. Published Northern Ireland case processing statistics show a slight improvement between 2023-24 and 24-25, with the median time for criminal cases across all courts falling from 190 to 189 days. This is also down considerably from the height of 226 days in 2021-22. That's driven mainly by quicker processing times in the Magistrates Court. In the Crown Court, charged cases have improved slightly, but case processing times for cases proceeding by way of summons remain long. The CBA action has had a significant impact on the Crown Court and may impact on the pace at which these reform initiatives can be fully implemented.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I welcome that there are some updates and some improvements in the response that the Minister has given. And you made reference to the issues that there are with the Criminal Bar Association. Could I ask for an update on how negotiations are going in that process, because a swift conclusion to that will unlock much of the delays that we are currently experiencing?
Well, I think first of all to say not all the delays that we experience in the justice system are down to the current action by the Criminal Bar, though it has contributed significantly to them. The accelerated review, as you know, concluded as planned on the 27th of April. I made decisions and met with the Criminal Bar and the Solicitor's Criminal Bar last week. I put those decisions to them. They have been welcomed by the Law Society and the Solicitor's Criminal Bar, and I await the outcome of meetings that are going on within the Criminal Bar and the Bar Council itself in terms of any response that they might have to the proposals.
Linda Dillon.
Brilliant, and thank the Minister. Minister, we met with the Public Protection Branch as a policing board last week, and they raised some really significant challenges that they are facing. And we know the attrition rates within some of these cases around violence against women and girls and children. And I think that that seriously needs to be addressed. Would you agree to meet with some members of the Public Protection Branch? There are some issues within that branch that they are facing that I think very minor adjustments could really address for them. Would you engage directly with them? I think it's the people who are working on the ground that you need to be engaging with rather than even their senior officers to find out what could be done in order to help them to do their job to protect women and girls and children.
Well, to reassure the member, I have met with Public Protection Branch, both senior officers and others who work at the coalface in this work, and I'm conscious of the difficult and challenging work that they do. And obviously what we would want to be able to do is get them more resources to be able to do that job better. If there are changes that can be implemented as part of the work we're doing to speed up justice, we would of course be open to that and regularly meet to discuss it. This is not just a Department of Justice project, it is a project that has been endorsed by the Criminal Justice Board, which includes the PSNI, the PPS, the Lady Chief Justice and crucially the Commissioner for Victims. So it is important that all of those different aspects are able to be discussed, but I'm happy of course if the member wishes to engage with me further about the particulars of the areas of concern that she's raising. I'm more than happy to meet with her to discuss it.
Altsy McGlone.
Question number 6, please.
Patton envisaged a new beginning for policing in Northern Ireland, grounded in accountability, community partnership and policing with the consent of all. 25 years on, while it is right to reflect on progress, it is wrong to suggest the vision of Patton has not been realised. The transformation of policing in Northern Ireland has been profound. The Police Service of Northern Ireland today operates within a human rights-based framework, subject to rigorous and independent oversight and anchored in community-focused policing. Public confidence in policing and the wider justice system is strong. Significant progress has been made over that time to ensure the service is accountable, community-based and accepted by all parts of society. This progress is all the more notable given the very real pressures policing continues to navigate, particularly around constrained resources and legacy issues. Despite this, Northern Ireland remains one of the safest places to live, work and raise a family in these islands, reflecting both effective policing and safer communities. I note the assessment of the current security threat and in particular the positive direction that Northern Ireland has moved over the last 25 years. Whilst we must never be complacent, Mr Speaker, particularly given recent events in Lurgan and Dunmurry police stations, it is gratifying to note the sustained decline in the number of security incidents over the past decade. I will continue to work with partners within the remit of my role to enable further movement towards a safer society within Northern Ireland.
Mr McGlone.
Thanks very much, Minister. Minister, can you confirm how the report's recommendations will in fact shape departmental priorities, whether any of those recommendations will require legislative change, and if so, when such proposals might be brought before the Assembly?
Well, as the member will be aware, the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee reports are not binding on this Assembly and are a matter for Westminster. However, we will of course and always do reflect on any important report that is dealing with the issue of policing. One of the key findings in terms of the report was the clear agreement with both myself and the Chief Constable that the continued burden of legacy on the justice system and particularly on policing is not a sustainable one. That's an issue where I have already been engaging with the Chief Constable, with the Secretary of State and more widely with government. I think it is incredibly important that we make the case that with any new legacy arrangements, the cost of servicing those legacy arrangements and also the residual cost of dealing with legacy needs now to be met by the UK Government. This is not a Northern Ireland specific issue. It is a UK government issue and it should be dealt with as such. It is also a burden on our policing and justice system that exists nowhere else in the United Kingdom, and I very much welcome the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee's narrative on that matter.
Mr Malone, topicals.
Okay. Minister, in light of last night's horrific knife attack on Kinnaird Avenue in North Belfast, and of course our thoughts are first and foremost with the victim of that horrific attack, but will you join with me, with my party and with other members of the Assembly in thanking the emergency services, the police and ambulance crews for their prompt response, and the members of the public who bravely intervened to save the victim from further injury?
Yes, I'm more than happy to do so, and to reiterate the comments that I made in that regard this morning when we were debating the legislation. And the Speaker was generous enough to give me the latitude to do so. I think it is incredibly important to recognise what a horrific scene unfolded last night, how challenging and frightening it must have been initially for the residents who intervened courageously to try to save a man's life, but also for those who responded from the PSNI, from the ambulance service and others, and were confronted with such horror and tried to save someone's life. I think many of us at times forget just how challenging such situations can be and the trauma that can be felt by people who experience it. And it's one of the reasons, Mr Speaker, why I have appealed today for people not to share the video of that. We talked before about the trauma inflicted on victims when videos of car accidents and when videos of other violence is seen on our streets. And I would appeal for people not to share those images, because both the family and indeed especially the victim deserve privacy and dignity, but also the trauma that will inflict on people who were at the scene, I think, is immeasurable.
Mr Malone.
I couldn't agree more, Minister, but horrific incidents, indeed like this one, can heighten fear and undermine community cohesion. And we have already seen the efforts by some, not even indigenous to this country, to capitalise on that fear. Can I ask, Minister, what measures and indeed what engagement you've had with the Chief Constable and your department to support community safety, assist the ongoing investigation and reassure residents, including many people who have come here to work and contribute positively to this society, who are all deeply shaken by this event? And uppermost, Minister, I'm sure you will share what many of us will want to see here. That's calm in light of this awful, distressing situation.
Well, I think it's absolutely vital that people remain calm. What happened last night was obscene. What would be as obscene is for us to inflict more pain and hurt either on that community or on other communities that are completely unrelated to the incidents that happened last night. It is important that we do not head into that kind of destructive cycle. And of course there are those bad faith actors who will try to weaponise every pain, every fear that communities have. I understand entirely why people are frightened by what they saw last night. I found it disturbing and frightening. And so I cannot say enough that I'm not dismissive of the fear that they feel. But we have to draw a line between feeling fearful and wanting that reassurance that they will be safe, and others who seek to inflame tension, to weaponise that fear, and to bring more harm to communities and create more victims. An investigation is ongoing. It is important that anyone with information contacts the PSNI. I spoke with the Chief Constable this morning, and I will, all being well, be at a press conference with the Chief Constable and the First and Deputy First Minister and others as the afternoon progresses, to reinforce the need for us to make sure that every person in our community, irrespective of the colour of their skin, irrespective of their language, irrespective of their religion, irrespective of all of those issues, that every single person in our community is safe. And I have to say that it was brought home to me this afternoon when I left the chamber and went and spoke to a young woman who was doing work experience here, who was both shaking and sobbing in fear and shame at what she had seen last night, for fear that she would be associated with it, and in shame that it had happened. Let's not forget that when somebody does something wrong, they are accountable. Let's work with the police and hold the person who is responsible, the individual, to account. Let's not weaponise it against a whole community. That would be a travesty of justice.
Alan Chambers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the Minister share my concerns that some amendments in the Criminal Justice Bill, if passed, could embolden pupils under 14 to exercise aggressive or threatening behaviour in the classroom, safe in the knowledge that they will not be criminally investigated?
Well, schools already have disciplinary policies, not all of which require every incident to be referred to the PSNI as things stand. And as I made clear in the Chamber earlier, and will no doubt make clear again in the days to come, this is not about allowing people under the age of 14 to be unaccountable for their actions. And obviously it is important that young people are held accountable for their actions, particularly if those actions involve intimidation or sexual intent, because there is a public protection element to that needs to be dealt with. There is a public safety element of that needs to be dealt with. But I do not believe that a criminal response is always the right response, particularly for those younger children. And therefore I believe that it is important that we hold them to account in an age-appropriate way, with the right support, so that they can desist from their offending, understand the seriousness of their actions, and hopefully put that behind them and move on to live productive and constructive lives, which is what I think we would all want for our young people.
Mr. Chambers.
Would the Minister agree with me that her response may do little for the sense of safety or the general morale of teachers?
Well, many teachers are actually have given their support to these measures. So to suggest that this is about the Justice Department versus teachers is not the case. Many of those who are highly specialised in dealing with young people recognise that often bringing a young person, confronting them with their actions, confronting them with the consequences of their actions is much more effective than penalties. And so I think it's important that we listen carefully to what those who work with young people, who have experience in achieving desistance among young people, actually have to say about this, and who have spent years working, for example, in the youth justice system, ensuring that young people are safe and that they are not going on to create more victims. As I say, there will still be accountability, and I believe that accountability will be proportionate and appropriate. And as I said to your former colleague now from Upper Bann before lunchtime, we will not be implementing this legislation until such times as we have a robust mechanism for accountability in place.
Keith Buchanan.
Mr. Speaker, Minister, I just want to follow on from Mr. Madlone's comment on the North Belfast incident. Unfortunately, I did see the images the last night and this morning. No doubt a lot of people did. I worked in a slaughter hall for years and I never seen nothing like it. Barbaric. Minister, have we a problem?
Well, first of all, we clearly have an issue in that particular circumstance where a violent individual committed a very violent crime against another person, and far be it from me to diminish the seriousness of it. Do we have a problem with violence in this society? Well, I think the member knows the answer to that as well as I do. We do have a problem with violence in this society. We have a problem with violence against women and girls. We have high levels of violence against the person in our society, and that is why we bring forward measures through the Department of Justice and interventions to try to deal with those. So yes, I do think we have a problem. We have a problem about violence, and we're going to have to address that right across the board, irrespective of who is the perpetrator and who is the victim.
Mr. Buchanan.
Minister, what would you say to people, and there is genuine people out there, and most people are genuine, who have serious concerns? Sometimes their concerns is not taken on board, and we see on social media that people are organising rallies, this, rallies, that. Some of that may or not be true. What would you say to genuine people, because they are fearful? There is towns in Northern Ireland you can't go walking in at night, and I'm a man, and I wouldn't do it. So a woman's not going to do it. What would you say to those people who have concerns?
Well, there are a couple of things I would say. First of all, with respect to rallies, I am not a great believer, as members will know, in bringing large groups of people onto the street. when temperatures are inflamed and when emotions are running high. I don't think it has ever in Northern Ireland's history led to productive outcomes either for those communities or for others. And I would ask those people that you talk about who are of genuine intent and who are genuinely fearful, and I understand why. I said earlier, I find it terrifying to watch. I find it horrific, so I understand why people would be genuinely fearful and have a right to be so. I would ask them to cooperate with the police in terms of the investigation. Don't distract the police from the investigation by going onto the streets and drawing resources onto all of that. Let the police focus the resources they have on investigation and prosecution of this crime. Let's see the person responsible for this held accountable before the law, and let's see them get a sentence that is proportionate for the seriousness of the crime. I think that is the best reassurance that we can give every community, that if someone is attacked, irrespective of who they are or what they stand for, that if they are attacked, the person who is the perpetrator will be held accountable. And that, I think, is the best assurance we can give to anyone in our community today. And I hope that the member would join with me in appealing for calm so that the police can do their job without any distractions or interference.
Okay.
Ask the Minister for an update on the Victims and Witnesses Bill.
So I'm pleased to announce that the Victims and Witnesses Bill has been given authority to move forward by the Executive last week and is now with the Speaker's Office, who will do the normal due diligence on that piece of legislation with the hope that we can get it introduced in time for the committee to be able to do a call for evidence ahead of the summer.
Skye.
I thank the Minister for the response. Can I ask the Minister what will happen to the establishment of the Commissioner for Victims and Witnesses of Crime if the bill is not passed in this mandate?
Well, it will create something of an anomaly if we don't get the bill through in this mandate, given that the term of the current Commissioner is due to end at the point where any new statutory commissioner would come into being. So that will create something of a challenge for the department to manage. But I am confident that with goodwill and concerted effort, and I've had that so far from the Justice Committee on the other bills that have been brought to them, that we can get this through by the end of the mandate. It is a relatively small bill, and I say that recognising that members are aware of both the Chair of the Justice Committee and my proclivities when it comes to amendments to bills, but I think this one is fairly tightly circumscribed and hopefully reasonably focused, and therefore will be able to pass without overdue or without intended scrutiny.
Sorry, Carl.
Thank you. Minister, there is no doubt that the stabbing incident in North Belfast was horrific and horrendous. It's been condemned right across the board, and rightly so. Minister, I'm deeply concerned about Nigel Farage, Rupert Lowe, Elon Musk and people who couldn't point out Belfast on a map, who are doing their best to stoke division around this tragic incident. Would you share those concerns?
I very much would. I'm not sure when I last heard many of the individuals that you mentioned say anything about Northern Ireland at all. And anything they've had to say about the UK of late hasn't been particularly good either. From my perspective, it's the people in North Belfast and in Northern Ireland more generally that I care about. We live in this society. We recognise how much we've had to overcome in the past to end routine violence and abuse, some of which was also horrific and blood-curdling, but perhaps not captured on video. And I would appeal to people in Northern Ireland to listen to people here who actually have their interests at heart. Be calm, continue to work with the police and support them in pursuing their investigation, and do not be drawn in by people, bad faith actors, who simply want to weaponise a situation like this to drive forward an agenda which is in no one's interest in Northern Ireland.
Mr. Carroll.
Thanks for that answer, Minister. And as you said earlier, it's understandable that people are fearful in North Belfast given the horrific events, but you'll be aware, obviously, protests are gathering right across Belfast, if not the north, this evening, and there's fear, as you alluded to earlier on, amongst our migrant community and people of colour as well, that these protests may, we don't know how they're going to develop, if at all, but they may turn nasty and violent. What would your message be to those people who are fearful of how those protests may turn out?
Well, I would encourage anyone who is fearful for their own safety to contact the police immediately. And I believe that the police will do all in their power to respond. I would also appeal to those people who are upset, who are angry, who are fearful about what happened last night, to bear in mind that the police, if they are distracted from the work that they need to do to investigate this, by unrest on the streets or other crimes being committed, will have less resource to put to that. So I would appeal to people who are really of good intent, not to stretch the police resource, not to force themselves into conflict with the police, not to do harm to their neighbourhood and to their neighbours. Because ultimately there is nothing to be gained by terrorising people who had nothing to do with the incident last night. I have heard already today from numerous people who are concerned about their family, their friends, their work colleagues, who are now fearful because of the colour of their skin that they will not be safe on public transport or going about their ordinary daily lives. That is not acceptable. I remember the days when somebody with an accent like mine drew strange looks in airports, and it was not a pleasant experience to be held accountable simply because you shared an accent with somebody who would do harm. We do not want to inflict that kind of misery on any other group of people.
That draws to a conclusion. Questions to the Minister of Justice.